Police arrest autistic teen for no reason, then learn who his mom is. The small town of Brookfield was known for its quiet streets and tight-knit community. Neighbors looked out for each other, children played in the parks until dusk, and people prided themselves on knowing everyone's business. But one afternoon, everything changed, and the small town's illusion of harmony was shattered. 17-year-old Ethan Myers walked down Main Street, his headphones covering his ears, drowning out the noise of the world around him. Music had always been his escape, a way to process the overwhelming chaos of life. Ethan wasn't like other teens his age, he was autistic. Crowded places and sudden noises could send his world spinning, but he'd learned to manage it in his own way. He clutched a small notepad in his hand, scribbling down numbers and patterns that only he could understand. Numbers calmed him. They were predictable, logical, and safe, unlike the unpredictable nature of the people around him. It was an ordinary day until it wasn't. A police cruiser rolled up alongside Ethan as he walked past the diner on Main Street. Officer Daniels, a stern man with a reputation for being a stickler for the rules, rolled down his window. He had been watching Ethan for a while now, his suspicion growing with every step the teenager took. "Hey kid," Daniels called out, his voice sharp. "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't respond. The music in his headphones drowned out the officer's voice, and he was too engrossed in his notepad to notice the patrol car slowing to a stop. Daniels frowned, stepping out of the cruiser. He approached Ethan, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon, not out of necessity but habit. "I asked you a question," he said louder this time, his tone laced with irritation. Ethan froze, startled by the sudden voice cutting through his music. He turned, pulling his headphones down around his neck, his wide blue eyes blinking in confusion. I didn't hear you," he stammered, clutching his notepad tightly. "What are you doing out here?" Daniels demanded, his eyes narrowing. "You've been wandering up and down the street for the past hour. Are you up to something?" Ethan's brow furrowed as he struggled to process the officer's words. "I'm just walking," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "I like numbers. I'm writing them down." Daniels glanced at the notepad in Ethan's hand and snatched it away before the teen could react. He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. "What's all this?" Ethan reached out instinctively, his voice rising. "Give it back." "That's mine." Daniel stepped back, holding the notepad out of reach. "Calm down, I'm just looking. You've been acting suspicious, and I need to make sure you're not up to something." Ethan's breathing quickened, and his hands began to shake. The numbers in that notepad weren't just scribbles. They were his way of coping, his anchor in a world that often felt overwhelming. Without them, he felt untethered. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he cried, his voice cracking. "Please, just give it back." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. People peered out of shop windows and paused on the sidewalk, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Some recognized Ethan and whispered to one another, while others stood silently, unsure of what was happening. Daniels, feeling the weight of the onlookers' stares, made a decision. "Turn around," he said sharply, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Ethan's eyes widened in terror. "No, I didn't do anything. Please." But Daniels wasn't listening. He grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling it behind his back as he clicked the handcuffs into place. Ethan flinched at the sudden contact, his body stiffening as he struggled against the restraints. The sensory overload was too much. The noise, the crowd, the tightness of the handcuffs, and he began to shut down. "Stop resisting," Daniels barked, his grip tightening. "I'm not," Ethan sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "Please stop. I just want my numbers back." The crowd murmured in confusion and unease. Some people pulled out their phones, recording the scene, while others called out to the officer. "He's just a kid," one woman shouted. "He's autistic," another voice called. "He's not dangerous." But Daniels ignored them, dragging Ethan toward the cruiser. The teen's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the pavement, his sobs turning into shallow, panicked breaths. He curled into himself, his body shaking as he muttered under his breath, "Numbers, just numbers." As Daniels wrestled Ethan into the back seat of the cruiser, a woman pushed her way through the crowd. Her sharp voice cut through the chaos like a blade. What the hell do you think you're doing? Daniels turned, startled by the commanding presence of the woman who now stood before him. She was dressed in a tailored blazer and carried herself with an air of authority. Her dark eyes blazed with fury as she crossed her arms and stared him down. "Ma'am, please step back," Daniels said, his tone defensive. "This is a police matter." The woman ignored him, her gaze shifting to the back seat where Ethan was curled up, trembling. Her expression softened, and she took a step closer. "Ethan," she said gently. "It's okay. I'm here." Ethan's head snapped up at the sound of her voice, and a glimmer of recognition flashed in his tear-filled eyes. "Mom?" Daniels blinked in confusion, his confidence faltering. "Wait, this is your son?" The woman turned back to him, her fury reigniting. "Yes, officer, this is my son. My autistic son. And you've just made the biggest mistake of your career." Daniels shifted uneasily on his feet, the authority he had exuded moments ago melting away under the woman's sharp glare. "Ma'am, I was only doing my job," he stammered. "Your son was acting suspicious." "Suspicious," she cut in, her voice cold and biting. "Since when is walking down the street suspicious? Or is it the notepad that made you assume he was a threat?" The crowd grew silent, tension crackling in the air. Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but she didn't give him the chance. "You handcuffed my autistic son," she continued, her voice rising. "A child who was doing nothing but minding his own business. And now he's in the back of your car, terrified and traumatized because you couldn't take 30 seconds to ask the right questions?" Danielle's face reddened. I didn't know he was autistic. He didn't respond when I called out, and he resisted." "He didn't resist," she snapped, stepping closer to him. "He froze. He panicked. And if you knew anything about autism, you'd know that's how some autistic individuals respond to overwhelming situations." By now, the murmurs in the crowd had turned into a low roar. People began speaking up, their anger and confusion growing louder. "She's right. He wasn't doing anything wrong. This is exactly why people don't trust the police anymore. Let the boy go." Daniels held up his hands, trying to calm the onlookers. "Ma'am, please." "No," she said firmly, cutting him off again. "We're not going to please anything. You're going to unlock that car, take off those handcuffs, and hand my son back to me right now." Daniels hesitated, glancing around at the crowd that was now recording every moment of the encounter. He knew the situation had spiraled out of control, and the last thing he needed was to make it worse. With a sigh, he pulled out his keys and unlocked the cruiser's back door. Ethan flinched as the door opened, his eyes darting to Daniels before landing on his mother. "Mom," he whimpered, his voice small and shaky. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said gently, reaching out to help him out of the car. "You're safe now." As soon as Ethan was out, she pulled him into a hug, her arms wrapping protectively around him. She stroked his hair, whispering soothing words as his sobs quieted. "It's okay. I've got you." Daniels awkwardly fumbled with the handcuffs, finally unlocking them. Ethan immediately pulled his hands to his chest, rubbing his wrists as his mother continued to hold him. The woman turned back to Daniels, her expression a mix of fury and disgust. "You still haven't told me your name." Daniels swallowed hard. "Officer Daniels." "Well, Officer Daniels," she said, her tone icy, "I suggest you take a long, hard look at the way you handle situations like this. Because you've just endangered and traumatized a vulnerable teen, and I will not let this go unanswered." She straightened, her commanding presence radiating authority. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Myers. I'm a child psychologist, an advocate for individuals with disabilities, and a former advisor to the State Task Force on Autism Training for Law Enforcement. And I promise you, this incident will not be swept under the rug." Danielle's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He knew her name. Evelyn Myers was well known in the region for her work with children and her tireless advocacy for disability rights. Realizing the weight of the situation, he stammered, I didn't mean any harm, Dr. Myers. I was just trying to do my job." "Your job?" Evelyn shot back. "Your job is to protect and serve. Your job is to de-escalate situations, not make them worse. If you had taken a moment to talk to Ethan, To understand him, none of this would have happened. The crowd began to cheer softly, voices calling out in support of Dr. Myers and her words. Daniels looked around, his face flushed with embarrassment and regret. Evelyn turned to the onlookers, her voice steady and clear. This is why we need better training for law enforcement. Training that goes beyond stereotypes and assumptions. My son was lucky that I arrived in time, but too many families don't get that chance. The crowd clapped and nodded in agreement. Evelyn held Ethan close, her resolve unwavering. And believe me, Officer Daniels, she said, her tone sharp, this isn't the last you'll hear from me. Later that evening, Evelyn sat with Ethan in their cozy living room. The chaos of the day had finally settled, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Ethan sat curled up on the couch, clutching his notepad as he doodled numbers and patterns, his way of regaining a sense of control. Evelyn watched him for a moment, her heart aching. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't look up from his notepad. "I'm okay," he mumbled. But the way his shoulders tensed told her otherwise. She scooted closer to him, placing a gentle hand on his back. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan. What happened today wasn't your fault." He stopped drawing, his pencil hovering over the page. "Why did he think I was bad?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. Because some people don't understand, Ethan. They see things they don't recognize, and instead of asking questions, they make assumptions. But that doesn't mean you're bad. You're not bad, not even a little bit. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "You promise?" "I promise," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You're one of the kindest, smartest, most incredible people I've ever known. And I'm so proud of you." Ethan rested his head on her shoulder, his notepad clutched tightly in his hands. "Thanks, Mum." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn threw herself into action. She reached out to her contacts in advocacy organizations, local government, and the media, determined to use what had happened as a catalyst for change. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, it became a viral headline. "Police arrest autistic teen without cause. Mother fights for justice." Evelyn appeared on local news programs, calmly but firmly recounting the events of that day and calling for mandatory autism training for law enforcement officers. "This isn't about blaming one officer," she said during an interview. "It's about fixing a broken system. Officers need the tools and training to recognize and respond appropriately to individuals with disabilities. Without that, situations like what happened to my son will continue to happen." Her words struck a chord. Parents, educators, and advocates rallied behind her cause, organizing protests and town hall meetings. Evelyn found herself at the center of a growing movement, her voice amplified by the support of a community that refused to stay silent. Even Ethan, shy and reserved as he was, found a way to contribute. At Evelyn's encouragement, he created a video explaining what it's like to live with autism, using his love of numbers and patterns to illustrate his points. The video, shared on social media, quickly went viral, earning praise for its honesty and creativity. "I don't like loud noises or surprises," Ethan said in the video, his voice steady but earnest. "But I like numbers because they make sense. I'm not bad. I'm just different." The video ended with Ethan holding up a sign that read, "Different is not dangerous." As the movement gained momentum, the police department found itself under intense scrutiny. Officer Daniels issued a public apology, acknowledging his mistakes and pledging to undergo additional training. The department announced plans to implement new protocols for interacting with individuals with disabilities, and a task force was formed to develop and oversee the training. For Evelyn, it was a step in the right direction, but she knew the work was far from over. "This is just the beginning," she said during a community forum. "Real change takes time, but together, we can make sure no one else has to go through what my son did." Through it all, Ethan stood by her side, his notepad in hand and a quiet strength in his heart. He had been through something no child should ever experience, but with his mother's unwavering support, he had found his voice, and he wasn't afraid to use it. The momentum from the movement Evelyn started didn't waver. Over the next several months, new conversations emerged in Brookfield and beyond. Parents of children with disabilities began sharing their own stories, some heartbreaking, others triumphant. Evelyn quickly became a prominent voice in these discussions, her advocacy expanding far beyond the boundaries of her small town. Meanwhile, the changes within the police department were already starting to take shape. Mandatory autism training sessions were implemented, and officers were required to attend workshops led by experts like Evelyn. At one such session, Evelyn stood before a room full of officers, including Daniels, her expression both calm and resolute. "I'm not here to shame anyone," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here to educate, because education is the only way we prevent what happened to my son from happening again." Daniels, seated in the middle of the room, kept his gaze fixed on her, his expression unreadable. As Evelyn explained common behaviors associated with autism and demonstrated techniques for de-escalation, Daniels began to feel the weight of what he hadn't known. For the first time, he truly understood the harm he had caused, not just to Ethan, but to the trust his actions had undermined in the community. When the session ended, Daniels approached Evelyn hesitantly. "Dr. Myers," he said, his voice low, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, truly. I can't change what happened, but I'm trying to do better." Evelyn studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "Acknowledging the mistake is the first step, Officer Daniels. But what matters most is what you do moving forward." Daniels nodded, her words sinking in. He resolved to be part of the solution, even if it meant facing his own biases and shortcomings head-on. At home, Ethan continued to adjust to life after the incident. He was hesitant to return to Main Street at first, the memory of that day still fresh in his mind. But Evelyn encouraged him, reminding him that he had every right to exist in the world without fear or shame. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan," she told him one morning as they sat at the kitchen table. "And you don't have to let what happened define you." Ethan nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "What if people stare? What if they think I'm weird?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Being different doesn't mean you're less than, sweetheart. It means you see the world in a way most people don't. That's a gift, not a flaw." Bolstered by her words, Ethan decided to take small steps toward reclaiming his confidence. He started by walking with his mom to the park, then to the grocery store. Over time, he ventured out on his own again, his notepad in hand and his music playing softly in his headphones. One afternoon, as he walked past the diner where the incident had started, he noticed something new. A colorful mural had been painted on the side of the building, depicting children of all abilities playing together under a bright blue sky. At the center of the mural was a quote that read, "Different is not dangerous." Ethan stopped and stared at the mural, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. He recognized the quote immediately. It was his own, taken from the video he had made. Someone had turned his words into something beautiful, something that would remind everyone who passed by of the importance of acceptance and understanding. Meanwhile, Evelyn's work continued to gain recognition. She was invited to speak at conferences and schools, sharing her story and advocating for systemic change. She met with lawmakers to push for statewide implementation of autism training for law enforcement, a measure that garnered bipartisan support. One day, as Evelyn prepared for a speaking engagement, she found Ethan sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by papers covered in intricate designs of numbers and patterns. "What are you working on?" she asked, crouching beside him. Ethan looked up with a shy smile. "I'm designing a website." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "A website? What for?" "For kids like me," Ethan explained, his excitement growing. "A place where they can share their stories, talk about what makes them different, and show people that being different is okay." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. "That's an incredible idea, Ethan. How can I help?" Ethan grinned, handing her a piece of paper covered in notes. "I made a list of things I'll need. Maybe we can work on it together?" Evelyn nodded, her smile warm. "I'd love that." The project became a shared mission, a way for Ethan to turn his experience into something positive. Together, they built the website, filling it with stories, resources, and artwork from children around the world. They called it Different Together, a name that captured the essence of their message. As the months turned into a year, the effects of Evelyn and Ethan's efforts rippled far beyond Brookfield. The The police department's new training protocols became a model for other towns, and Different Together grew into a thriving online community. One evening, as Evelyn and Ethan sat together in their living room, a notification popped up on Ethan's laptop. It was an email from a mother in another state, thanking him for creating the website. "My son watched your video," the email read. "He's been struggling to feel accepted, but after seeing your story, he told me, 'I'm not alone. Thank you for giving him hope.'" Ethan read the email aloud, his voice trembling slightly. When he finished, he looked at his mom, his eyes shining with emotion. "Do you think we really made a difference?" Evelyn smiled, pulling him into a hug. "I don't think so, Ethan. I know so." As they sat together, the weight of their journey felt lighter. They had faced fear, ignorance, and injustice, but they had turned those experiences into something powerful, a movement that proved the strength of compassion, understanding, and resilience. Evelyn kissed the top of Ethan's head, her heart full. "You've changed the world, sweetheart. And you're just getting started." Months later, Different Together had grown beyond anything Ethan and Evelyn had imagined. Schools, community centers, and advocacy groups across the country were using the platform to share stories, educate others, and build support networks. The small project born out of Ethan's desire to help others had become a movement in its own right. With the website's success came new opportunities and challenges. Ethan, who had always preferred the comfort of numbers and quiet spaces, suddenly found himself in the spotlight. Requests for interviews and appearances began pouring in, and while Evelyn was overjoyed by the impact they were making, she was careful not to push Ethan beyond his limits. One afternoon, as they sat in the kitchen reviewing an invitation to a national autism awareness conference, Ethan tapped his pencil against the table, his gaze fixed on the paper in front of him. "Do I have to go?" he asked quietly. Evelyn looked up, her expression soft. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, sweetheart. But they invited you because your story has inspired so many people. This could be a chance to help even more." Ethan's brow furrowed as he considered her words. He didn't like crowds, and the thought of standing on a stage made his stomach twist. But the emails and messages he had received through the website had shown him how much his voice mattered. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over his. "That's okay. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it anyway because it's important." Ethan nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "Will you be there with me?" "Always," Evelyn said with a smile. "We'll do it together." The conference, held in a sprawling convention center, was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The hall was packed with people, parents, educators, advocates, and children, all gathered to learn and connect. Posters and banners filled the space, and the hum of conversation buzzed in the air. Ethan clutched his notepad tightly as they made their way to the stage. His heart pounded in his chest, and he focused on the familiar comfort of numbers, tracing invisible patterns with his finger as they walked. When they reached the backstage area, a kind-looking woman greeted them. "Ethan, Dr. Myers, it's such an honor to have you here," she said warmly. "Your segment is up next." Ethan glanced at Evelyn, who gave him an encouraging nod. "You've got this," she whispered. As the announcer introduced them, Ethan felt a surge of panic, but Evelyn's steady presence beside him kept him grounded. Together, they stepped onto the stage, greeted by a wave of applause. Evelyn spoke first, sharing their story with clarity and passion. She talked about the day Ethan had been arrested, the lessons they had learned, and the change they had fought for. The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. When it was Ethan's turn, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. The microphone felt heavy in his hand, and the sea of faces blurred together. But then he remembered the messages he had received, the kids who had found hope in his story. "My name is Ethan," he began, his voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. "I'm different. And for a long time, I thought that was a bad thing. But it's not. Being different means seeing the world in a way that others might not understand, but that doesn't make it wrong." He paused, glancing at his notepad for reassurance. "I was scared to tell my story, but my mom taught me that even if you're scared, you can still do something important." And I think it's important for everyone to know that being different is not dangerous. It's just different. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of pride that overshadowed his fear. He glanced at Evelyn, who beamed with pride, her eyes glistening with tears. The conference was a turning point for Ethan. While he still preferred his quiet routines and familiar comforts, he began to embrace opportunities to share his story in ways that felt authentic to him. He created videos, wrote blog posts, and even hosted virtual Q&A sessions on the Different Together platform. Evelyn, too, found new purpose in her work. She partnered with schools and law enforcement agencies to develop comprehensive training programs, using their story as a case study to emphasize the importance of understanding and empathy. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Evelyn received an email from a state senator. The message was an invitation to testify at a hearing for a proposed bill that would mandate disability awareness training for all public employees. "This is big," Evelyn said, her voice filled with excitement as she read the email aloud. "If this passes, it could make a huge difference." Ethan looked up from his notepad. "Will you do it?" Evelyn smiled. "Of course. But I was thinking, maybe you could come with me." Ethan's eyes widened. "Me? You don't have to speak if you don't want to," she assured him. "Just being there would send a powerful message. It's your story that's inspired so many people, Ethan. You've shown them what's possible." After a moment of hesitation, Ethan nodded. "But I'll go." The hearing was held at the state capitol, a grand building filled with lawmakers, journalists, and advocates. Evelyn spoke with her usual poise, sharing their experiences and urging the committee to pass the bill. When her testimony was over, one of the senators turned to Ethan, who was seated beside her. "Ethan," the senator said, his tone kind, "would you like to say anything?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at Evelyn. She gave him an encouraging nod, and he took a deep breath before standing. "I'm not good with speeches," he began, his voice soft but steady. "But I know what it feels like to be misunderstood. And I don't want anyone else to feel like that. If this bill helps people understand kids like me, then I think it's a good idea." The room fell silent for a moment, and then a wave of applause filled the space. Ethan sat down, his cheeks flushed, but a small smile played on his lips. The bill passed with overwhelming support, and Evelyn and Ethan's story became a symbol of hope and change. Over time, the changes they had fought for began to take root, creating a world where children like Ethan could feel safer, understood, and valued. At home, life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan continued to grow, his confidence blooming in ways that amazed Evelyn every day. And while the journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth every step. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Ethan turned to Evelyn and said, "Mom, do you think I'm brave?" Evelyn smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "I think you're the bravest person I know." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think I am too." And in that moment, Evelyn knew that despite everything they had faced, they had created something beautiful, a life filled with love, purpose, and the courage to make a difference. In the months following the bill's passage, Ethan and Evelyn's lives began to settle into a new normal. While their advocacy work remained a significant part of their lives, they also found time to focus on their personal growth and their relationship as mother and son. For Ethan, the confidence he had built continued to grow. His website, Different Together, became a hub for children and families from all walks of life to share their stories and connect with one another. Ethan spent hours reading the messages people sent, many of them expressing gratitude for the hope and encouragement he had given them. One day, as he was going through the site's message board, he came across a post from a boy named Luis. Luis, who was also autistic, shared his struggles with bullying at school and how he often felt invisible to his teachers and peers. Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his chest tightening. It reminded him of his own experiences, the loneliness, the misunderstandings, and the feeling of not belonging. He decided to write back. "Hi Luis," Ethan typed, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "I understand how you feel. It's hard when people don't see you for who you really are. But you're not alone. There are so many of us who know exactly what you're going through, and we're here for you. Stay strong. You're braver than you think." After sending the message, Ethan leaned back in his chair, a small smile forming on his lips. He realized that by helping others, he was also helping himself. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to build on the momentum of their advocacy work. She traveled to conferences and workshops, sharing their story and providing training to educators, police officers, and community leaders. Each event reinforced her belief that real change was possible, even if it came slowly. One evening, Evelyn received an email from a school principal in a neighboring district. The principal, Ms. Carpenter, explained that her school was struggling to create an inclusive environment for students with disabilities and asked if Evelyn would be willing to visit and help. Evelyn agreed without hesitation. She invited Ethan to join her, knowing that his perspective would be invaluable. When they arrived at the school, they were greeted by Ms. Carpenter, a kind woman with a warm smile. She led them to a classroom where a group of teachers and administrators had gathered. "Thank you for being here," Ms. Carpenter said as they entered. "We've heard so much about your work, and we're eager to learn." Evelyn began by sharing her insights, focusing on practical strategies for fostering inclusion and understanding. Then she turned to Ethan. "My son has taught me more about strength and resilience than anyone else," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Ethan, would you like to share your thoughts?" Ethan hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the room. Public speaking still wasn't his favorite thing, but he had learned to push through his nerves when it mattered. "Hi," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm Ethan. I've been in schools where I felt invisible, like nobody understood me. It's not a good feeling. But I think if teachers take the time to listen and learn, it can make a big difference. Kids like me just want to feel like we belong." The room fell silent as the educators absorbed his words. Ms. Carpenter smiled, nodding in agreement. "Thank you, Ethan. That's exactly what we needed to hear." Afterward, as they walked to the car, Ethan turned to Evelyn. "Do you think it helped?" Evelyn smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "I know it did." As time went on, Ethan began to embrace more opportunities to step out of his comfort zone. He joined a local robotics club, where he found a group of peers who shared his love of technology and problem-solving. For the first time, he felt like he was part of a community that truly accepted him. One evening, as Evelyn was preparing dinner, Ethan burst into the kitchen, his face lit up with excitement. "Mom, guess what?" he exclaimed. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Our robotics team is going to the state competition," he said, practically bouncing with excitement. "And they asked me to be the lead programmer." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. "That's amazing, Ethan. I'm so proud of you." Ethan grinned, his confidence radiating. "I didn't think they'd pick me, but they said I'm the best at debugging code." "Well, they're absolutely right," Evelyn said, pulling him into a hug. "You're going to do great." The competition became a milestone for Ethan. Standing with his team on the stage as they presented their project, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced before. When their team won second place, Ethan held the trophy with pride, knowing that he had found his place in the world. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to expand her advocacy efforts. She began working with national organizations to push for federal legislation that would require disability awareness training across all public sectors. Her work took her to Washington, D.C., where she met with lawmakers and policy experts to discuss the importance of systemic change. During one such trip, Evelyn was invited to speak at a congressional hearing on disability rights. As she stood before the committee, she thought about everything she and Ethan had been through, the pain, the fear, but also the growth and the triumphs. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "But it starts with understanding. My son taught me that being different is not something to be feared, it's something to be celebrated. And it's our responsibility to create a world where every child feels safe, valued, and accepted." Her words resonated deeply, and the committee members responded with applause. For Evelyn, it was another step toward building a better future, not just for Ethan, but for all children like him. As the years passed, Ethan continued to thrive. He graduated high school with honors, his achievements a testament to his hard work and determination. At the ceremony, Evelyn sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as Ethan crossed the stage to receive his diploma. When he turned to the audience and spotted her, he held up the diploma with a grin. Evelyn clapped until her hands hurt, her heart bursting with pride. Later that evening, as they sat together in the backyard, watching the stars, Ethan turned to her. "Mom," he said, his voice thoughtful, "do you think I'll be able to help more people someday?" Evelyn smiled, reaching out to hold his hand. "You already have, Ethan. And I know you'll keep making a difference, no matter what you choose to do." Ethan nodded, a quiet confidence in his expression. "I think I want to keep working on Different Together. There are still a lot of kids out there who need to know they're not alone." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart full. "That sounds perfect." And as they sat beneath the endless expanse of stars, Evelyn knew that their journey, though filled with challenges, had been one of love, growth, and hope, a journey that had made them stronger together. Years later, the name Different Together had become synonymous with advocacy and empowerment. What began as a simple website had grown into a non-profit organization with chapters in cities across the country. The platform provided resources, workshops, and support for families navigating the complexities of autism and other disabilities. At the heart of it all were Ethan and Evelyn, whose story continued to inspire countless people. Ethan, now in his early 20s, had taken on a leadership role within the organization. His knack for problem-solving and his deep understanding of what it meant to feel misunderstood made him an invaluable voice in shaping the nonprofit's mission. But as Different Together expanded, so did the responsibilities and the challenges. One day, as Ethan sat in his office, reviewing the budget for an upcoming project, he felt the familiar tug of doubt creeping in. The numbers weren't adding up, and the weight of running such a large organization was beginning to feel overwhelming. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, a picture of him and his mom standing in front of the mural on Main Street, the words, "Different is not dangerous," painted in bold colors behind them. It was a reminder of how far they had come and why they had started this journey in the first place. Just then, Evelyn walked into the office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one down in front of Ethan and took a seat across from him. "You look like you've been staring at those numbers for hours," she said with a smile. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We're trying to fund a new mentorship program, but the costs are higher than I expected. I'm not sure how we're going to make it work." Evelyn took a sip of her coffee, her gaze thoughtful. "You know, when we started this, I never imagined it would grow this much. But it did because people believe in what we're doing. Maybe it's time to reach out to them." Ethan frowned. "You mean, ask for donations?" Evelyn nodded. "Not just donations. Partnerships, sponsorships. There are people out there who want to help. They just need to know how." Ethan considered her words, his mind already spinning with ideas. "That could work," he said slowly. "But I'd have to speak to potential sponsors, and you know how I feel about public speaking." Evelyn smiled gently. "You've come so far, Ethan. I know it's not easy, but I also know you're capable of more than you think." Her words stayed with him, and over the next few weeks, Ethan began reaching out to local businesses, community leaders, and even larger corporations. It wasn't easy, each meeting tested his resolve, but with Evelyn's support and his own quiet determination, he managed to secure the funding they needed. The mentorship program launched a few months later, pairing young people with disabilities with mentors who could guide and support them. The program quickly became one of Different Together's most successful initiatives, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride every time he heard about the impact it was making. While Ethan focused on the day-to-day operations of Different Together, Evelyn took on a new challenge, writing a book. Over the years, she had been encouraged by friends and colleagues to document their journey, but she had always hesitated. It wasn't until she realized how many lives their story had touched that she decided to take the leap. The book, titled Different Together, A Journey of Love, Advocacy, and Change, was part memoir, part guide for families navigating similar experiences. Evelyn poured her heart into every chapter, recounting their struggles, triumphs, and the lessons they had learned along the way. When the book was published, it received widespread acclaim. Parents, educators, and advocates praised its honesty and practical advice, and it quickly became a bestseller in its category. Evelyn found herself on book tours and speaking engagements, sharing their story with audiences around the country. During one such event, a young woman approached Evelyn after her talk. She was holding a copy of the book, her hands trembling slightly. "Dr. Myers," the woman said, her voice quivering, "I just wanted to thank you. Your book, it helped me understand my son in a way I never could before. It gave me hope." Evelyn's heart swelled as she reached out to take the woman's hands. "Thank you for sharing that," she said softly. "Your son is lucky to have you." Moments like these reminded Evelyn of why she and Ethan had fought so hard, not just for their own family, but for all the families who needed a voice, a guide, and a reminder that they weren't alone. As the years went on, both Ethan and Evelyn found new ways to grow and adapt. Ethan continued to push himself, stepping into roles he once thought impossible. He began giving keynote speeches at conferences, his quiet strength and authenticity resonating deeply with audiences. One such speech, delivered at an international autism summit, was particularly memorable. Standing on the stage before thousands of attendees, Ethan shared his journey, from the boy who had been misunderstood and arrested to the man who now led an organization dedicated to empowering others. "I used to think my differences were something to hide," he said, his voice steady and clear. "But they're not. They're part of what makes me who I am. And I've learned that being different isn't just okay, it's powerful." The audience erupted into applause, and Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment that was hard to describe. He had found his voice, and he was using it to make the world a better place. At home, Evelyn and Ethan's bond remained as strong as ever. They often spent evenings reminiscing about how far they had come, sharing laughs over old memories and dreaming about the future. One such evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Evelyn turned to Ethan. "Do you ever think about what you've accomplished?" Ethan smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes. But I don't think it's just about what I've done. It's about what we've done, together." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to hold his hand. "You've made me so proud, Ethan. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for the person you've become." Ethan squeezed her hand, his expression soft. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." And as they sat together, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, they knew that their journey, though filled with challenges, had been one of love, growth, and an unwavering commitment to making a difference. Ethan's success at the International Autism Summit opened doors he never thought possible. Invitations poured in from across the globe, universities, advocacy organizations, tech companies, and government agencies wanted him to share his insights and experiences. While Ethan was honored by the recognition, the increased attention also brought new pressures. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Ethan sat in his office, staring at the list of upcoming events on his calendar. The sheer number of commitments felt overwhelming, and for the first time in years, doubt crept into his mind. He looked up as Evelyn entered the room, a tray of tea in her hands. She set it down on his desk, her keen eyes immediately noticing the tension in his posture. "Long day?" she asked gently, sitting across from him. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's more than that, Mom. I feel like I'm being pulled in 100 different directions. Everyone wants me to speak, to lead, to do more. But sometimes, I just want to be me. I want to focus on my patterns, my numbers, my work at different together." Evelyn reached out, placing a reassuring hand over his. "It's okay to feel that way, Ethan. You've taken on so much, and it's natural to need time to recharge. You don't have to say yes to everything." "But what if I let people down?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with worry. "What if I miss an opportunity to make a difference?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Making a difference doesn't mean you have to do everything. It's about doing the things that matter most to you. The people who truly support you will understand." Ethan nodded, her words easing some of the weight on his shoulders. Over the next few days, he began to scale back his commitments, focusing on the projects and events that resonated most with him. It was a difficult decision, but it allowed him to find balance, a lesson he would carry with him for years to come. Meanwhile, Different Together continued to flourish. One of Ethan's favorite projects was the mentorship program, which had expanded to include a series of workshops and summer camps for children with disabilities. The camps, held in scenic locations across the country, provided a safe and inclusive environment where kids could explore their interests, build friendships, and develop confidence. Ethan made it a point to visit at least one camp every summer. He loved seeing the joy on the kids' faces as they participated in activities ranging from art and music to robotics and hiking. During one such visit, he met a young boy named Liam, who reminded him of himself at that age. Liam, a quiet 8-year-old with a love of puzzles, struggled to connect with his peers. He often sat alone, piecing together intricate designs while the other kids played nearby. Ethan noticed him one afternoon and decided to sit down beside him. "Hi, I'm Ethan," he said, offering a warm smile. "What are you working on?" Liam glanced up briefly before returning to his puzzle. "A dragon," he said softly. "It's got 1,000 pieces." "That's impressive," Ethan said, genuinely intrigued. "Do you like puzzles?" Liam nodded. "They make sense. I like when things fit together." Ethan smiled, recognizing the sentiment. "I get that. I feel the same way about numbers. Want some help with the dragon?" Liam hesitated for a moment before nodding. Together, they worked on the puzzle, and as the afternoon went on, Liam began to open up. By the end of the week, he was participating in group activities and even teaching other kids how to solve puzzles. When it was time for Ethan to leave, Liam hugged him tightly. "Thanks for helping me," he said. "I didn't think I could make friends, but you showed me I could." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. Moments like these reminded him why he had started Different Together in the first place. Back home, Evelyn was embarking on a new chapter of her own. With Ethan taking on more leadership at the nonprofit, she decided to return to her roots as a child psychologist. Her experiences as an advocate had deepened her understanding of the unique challenges faced by children with disabilities, and she was eager to bring that knowledge back to her practice. She opened a small clinic in Brookfield, specializing in counseling and support for children and their families. The clinic quickly became a trusted resource in the community, and Evelyn found immense fulfillment in helping others navigate their journeys. One afternoon, as she was wrapping up a session, she received a surprise visit from a familiar face, Officer Daniels. "Dr. Myers," he said, shifting nervously in the doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Not at all. Come in." Daniels entered, his posture uncertain. "I just wanted to thank you for the training, the workshops, everything. It's changed the way I approach my job. And it's changed me." Evelyn's smile deepened. "I'm glad to hear that. It takes courage to acknowledge mistakes and work toward growth." Daniels nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's because of you and Ethan. You didn't just call me out, you showed me how to do better. And I'm grateful for that." As Daniels left, Evelyn felt a sense of closure. The man who had once caused her son so much pain had become an ally in their mission for change, a testament to the power of understanding and forgiveness. As the years passed, both Ethan and Evelyn continued to thrive. Ethan's work with Different Together led to groundbreaking initiatives, including partnerships with tech companies to develop accessibility tools and resources for people with disabilities. His innovative ideas earned him recognition as a leader in his field, and he was invited to speak at global conferences on inclusion and technology. Evelyn's clinic also flourished, and she became a mentor to young psychologists entering the field. Her book, now translated into multiple languages, remained a staple for families and educators around the world. Despite their busy lives, Ethan and Evelyn always made time for each other. They celebrated milestones together, from the launch of new projects to quiet evenings at home filled with laughter and memories. One such evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Evelyn turned to Ethan. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. Ethan smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "I think about it all the time. There's so much more we can do, so many more people we can help. But I also know it's not just about the big things. It's about the little moments too. Like this." Evelyn nodded, her heart full. "You've taught me so much, Ethan. About strength, resilience, and what it means to truly make a difference." Ethan looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "And you've taught me that it's okay to be myself. That being different isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate." As they sat together, the quiet hum of the evening surrounding them, they knew that their journey, though filled with challenges, had been one of love, growth, and an unshakable commitment to making the world a better place.